my second speaker is Çelik Ekmekçi. He completed his MA courses at Pamukkale University and he studied and finished his reading period of his MA dissertation in Spain. He had his degree under his thesis entitled Science Fictional Parody as a postmodernist trope in Douglas Adams' serial novel The Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy. He completed his PhD courses at İstanbul, Aydın University. He is doing his researches on doctoral dissertation entitled Body Politics in Angela Carter's work. Now, he is working as instructor at Çankırı Karatekin University.
So, thank you so much. So it's been the first time for me that I've been at Beacon University. Honestly, you know, there's a shifting in my career from science fiction to gender studies, and it is great feeling. I strongly advise you because once upon a time I was studying sci-fi, but now I've been studying sadomasochistic pornography, and then it is really good. And then now at this paper, I would like to, of course, after the definition of multiculturalism, so, you know, I don't need to talk anymore from the first sectional, but I just want to apply one theorist and his essay into two novels, but at the same time, I just want to give a kind of a definition to you in terms of black diaspora and black racism. So hope you enjoy it. I'll try my best. So first of all, to begin with, by depending upon it, this is useful to start with the definition of multiculturalism and its political connection. In that, quote, multiculturalism is a fact of contemporary political life, yet it is also an issue that threatens to undermine the viability of a modern democratic state with its ideal of equal citizenship, unquote. So multiculturalism is also defined as a system of principle which has its close initiation with nations as follows, quote, the canon consists mainly of works that convey and sustain racism, patriarchy, imperialism, and understate and exclude interests and accomplishments of blacks, Hispanics, and other ethnic minorities, and also the achievements of women, working class, popular culture, homosexuals, and non-European civilizations. The demand is to open the canon so as to make it multicultural, unquote. Therefore, as it is stated above, through this conceptualization, multiculturalism arises and takes its place against the term Eurocentric, as it's explained before. So this Eurocentric issue is just put into question by Edward Said in his Orientalism, as you know. So Eurocentrism versus Orientalism, I think the Orientalism is a kind of term that just put upon by Eurocentric issue. So it's so complex for me, but I'll try my best for that because I just want to apply to black feminism. It's a little bit tough. Okay. So politically, it's been uttered that multiculture designates to the movement to redress what are asserted to be errors and the injustices of history dominated by Europe-centered historians, so as to make it represent adequately to cultural contributions of races and groups. Hence, it is understood that multiculturalism serves to cope with the Eurocentric-oriented world despite its political corruption. Similarly, these multifaceted dimensions of multiculturalism are further explicated in many ways. It has further been shown that multiculturalism is a body of thought in political philosophy about the proper way to respond to cultural religious diversity. In other explication, multiculturalism is identified as the name for an approach that shows in another way of using knowledge to understand ideas and events. From this point forward, this multicultural procedures in a variety of socio-political circumstances take part in the core of argument in Cornel versus the new cultural politics of difference. So from this scope, thematically, Cornel West in his essay handles black diaspora to represent the cultural and political rights of blacks generally. Justifiably, in his statements, West proclaims the fact that there are some cultural attitudes of blacks to raise the negative representation of the past, which ignites the conflict between whites and blacks, so it becomes the concern of multiculturalism. So it reminds me of one novel. I think Professor, of course, you know it very well. Percival Everett's Erasure. So during the novel, guys, there's one black character, and I think, but he's been criticized from both parties, from both blacks and whites. In that, for blacks, they say that, okay, so you, by the way, he's a note and very well-known one, and then they say that, okay, you are black, but you are not black enough to explicate the burdens of blacks. But on the other hand, the critic from whites just goes through that, okay, you are living in a white-oriented world, but please behave in a Eurocentric way. So he seems like he's in between. So this reminds me of this. And then, by the way, Professor, please pardon me, I've got no ability to limit myself, but I was going to ask question, but I didn't. All right, later. Okay, so, okay, black diaspora, and then culture, politic rights of blacks generally, this verse is just coming through. And then he says that the initial black diaspora response was a mode of resistance that was moralistic in content and communal in character. That is, the fight for representation and recognition highlighted moral judgments regarding black positive images over and against white supremacist stereotypes. Heroin, on this basis, ethnic, cultural, and racial incidences are clarified under the decolonization process. Thus, Cornel West says that the emergence of intellectual resistance and then takes its place within the issue of black diaspora. And then by doing so, under multiculturalism, new type of culture, political critique originates, especially under black intellectual women. He explicates this issue as follows. The decisive push of postmodern black intellectual towards a new cultural politics of difference has been made by the powerful critiques and the constructive explorations, and then black diaspora women, including Toni Morrison and then the other ones. In this regard, the black diaspora womanist critic has had a great impact than the critics that highlighted exclusively in terms of class, age, and sexual orientation. Thereby, if it's handled from this perspective, it can explicitly be said that in the core of black diaspora, there's the issue of sexism, class oppression, and racism as a prior importance. These issues are intermingled with one another, theoretically pointed out under black feminism. Thus here, the aim is to solve these problems. Therefore, Alice Walker, an American writer, can be considered as a pioneer of this movement with his womanism. Basically, in her womanist prose, Walker identifies herself as the spokesperson of blacks who's aware of everything, and this awareness is explicated by Lindsay Tucker in her essay called Alice Walker's Color Purple Emergent Woman, Emergent Text as follows. Quote, Alice Walker, aware of black women as particularly muted group, has addressed herself in much of her work to the problem of the black woman as a creator. In her womanist prose, work in search of mothers and all gardens, for example, she describes those grandmothers and mothers of ours, not saints, but artists, driven to a number of bleeding madness by the springs of creativity in them for which there was no release. In addition to this, it is further expressed that Alice Walker's feminism has this close relation to black race, gender, and sexuality as follows. Quote, Alice Walker, a founder of womanism, is the author of The Color Purple. Within the study of religion, womanism has been used as a source for womanist theology, a dominantly Christian movement that discussed issues of intersectionality, race, gender, class, and sexuality within the study of religion. Womanist scholarship is a dialogue partner to black theology, unquote. If it's grasped from here, black intellectuals, especially black women writers like Alice Walker and Toni Morrison, have had the same purpose in that. They wanted to show the problems of blacks throughout the years, and so they wanted to present these problems, in terms of race, gender, sexuality, and so on. As Cornel West stated that they want to abolish the misrepresentation of blacks as it took place in the past. To give an example, it is clear that in Alice Walker's novel, The Color Purple, black women are trying to endure much more difficulties than that of white women do. So here's the core of Walker's argument. This example from the novel shows the black women's position and how they are humiliated severely at that time. To give a specific example, During the novel, protagonist Sally is a black woman who comes across with many obstacles and difficulties, but nevertheless, she's using her power to be alive in an oriented world. Hence, from this general scope of understanding, Alice Walker in her novel tries to point out that black women are under pressure, and in order to indicate this general mentality, here in this quotation, the same situation has been uttered against Sally as follows. "Who you think you is," he say. "You can't curse nobody. Look at you. You black, you poor, you ugly, you a woman. God damn," he say. "You nothing at all," unquote. Likewise, in order to indicate black women's situation, which is highly inferior when it's compared with that of whites, here the following quotation shows the inner thought of Sally about destiny of black folks in that, quote, I start to wonder why us need love, why us suffer, why us black, why us men and women. Where do children really come from? I didn't take long to realize I didn't hardly know nothing. And that if you asked yourself why you black or woman or a bunch of it, I don't mean nothing. If you don't ask why you here, okay, it's a period, unquote. On the other hand, it is possible to observe such racial features and discriminative characteristics against blacks in Toni Morrison's Sula. In the novel, there are black characters who are trying to cope with the impending problematic situations at the same time. They strive at being itself in the world they live in. Thereby, in one of her conversations, Sula states the hardships of black people generally by internalizing them in that, quote, I know what every colored woman in this country is doing. What's that? Dying. Just like me. But the difference is they dying like a stump. Me, I'm going down like one of those redwoods. I'm sure I live in this world. As a result, by depending upon the explications above, it can explicitly be stated that Alice Walker and Toni Morrison write about black feminism. For the black feminism, this is a kind of a liberation of black women and the freedom of all people. This liberation is further pointed out through the activist purposes under which the core of argument about race and gender are clarified. Kimberly Springer mentions this situation as follows, quote, black feminists writing that now struggle with its advocating and love for black men while passionately hating black sexism. And while older black feminists are wrestling with past dilemmas and strive to impart knowledge about the struggle for racial and gender justice, younger black women are also joining the dialogue through their activism, music, and writing, unquote. Additionally, in black feminism, there are discrepancies between black women and the white women in that black women try to endure much more hardships and obstacles. But on the other hand, white women just trying to accuse them of being black. For black women, the term called inequality is much wider, and it is at the top for them. Thus, black feminists arise to support their rights. As a result of Alice Walker's panoramic black world is a good example that goes one-to-one correspondence with the issue of black intellectuals and its core manifestation in accordance with Cornel West's black intellectual term. This literary explications about show that in the literary area, these segregating elements of black race are illuminated in tandem with their states of mind, and that they have to flee from where they live. In other words, they have to move away by force to other places, and thereby this circumstance leads to the modern black diaspora issue in today's negative racial attitude, shows itself in another form under the exploitation of victims' secondary race, and this ideological apparatus is serving for the ideology of white mentality. And Cornel West states that, quote, the modern black diaspora problematic of invisibility and the namelessness can be understood as the condition of relative lack of black power to present themselves to themselves and others as complex human beings, and thereby to contest the bombardment of negative, degrading stereotypes put forward by white supremacist ideologies, unquote. Additionally, Cornel West states this procedures which he calls existential challenge for the colored people because they are somehow put into trial for survival in Eurocentric white-oriented world. Thus, colored people have got some burdens for this mentality. It is said that in the court of criticism and art or any matters regarding the life of the mind, people of color are guilty until proven innocent, unquote. This circumstance can be convenient for striking point that summarizes partial dualism between blacks and whites in that, quote, "We identify sexual violence in immigrants of color and the third world communities as cultural, while failing to recognize the cultural aspects of sexual violence affecting mainstream white women. This is related to the general failure to look at the behavior of white persons as cultural, while always ascribing to the label of culture to behavior of minority groups," unquote. There is so in this procedure, West wants to stress upon the issue that these are the things that multicultural politics of difference try to be active in this problematic atmosphere, because on condition that they gather together and behave mutually and show their resistance in a well manner, then modern activist communities are able to act together in terms of advocating the rights and give kind of political challenge. And consequently, what Cornel West tries to create in his new cultural politics of difference is a kind of a new type of black intellectuality whose contents depend upon new scope of mentality, which favors the questioning of all black representation. Then that becomes the new scope of black representation, which is thoroughly thought to be appropriate for blacks, so that black intellectuals' challenge will focus upon producing the true representation of blacks in terms of theoretical and cultural contents. Cornel West here in his essay wants to point out that he is totally disagree with the representation of WASP for black mainstream culture. It may be considered as one of the reasons that Cornel West supports black intellectuals, and under black intellectuals, he gives reference to Walker and Morrison, because he already knows that they are the pioneers of black feminism, whose ties are connected to the intellectual concept. This situation is explained similarly by Wooded. Quote, "Black feminism is also composed of body of knowledge and understanding that position itself as critical theory to criticize and address social problems. It further argues that black women intellectuals are central to the production of black feminist thought. Black feminists contend that there can be no separation of ideas from experience, and that black feminism is not a set of abstract principles, but it is a set of ideas that come directly from the historical point and contemporary experience of black women," unquote. In conclusion, here in this essay, I totally agree with Cornel West's argument, whose content depends upon black intellectual ideology, and whose procedure is so well organized that the core of argument is transmitted explicitly under the illumination of black feminism. In this theoretical essay, moreover, as a reader and researcher, I find political reasons for West to discuss multiculturalism, and which have some phases. These are the phases for cultural politics of difference. First one, there's the phase of humanism, and the second one is the phase of historical emergence of United States of America, and the last phase is the decolonization effect. And then all of which multiculturalism makes them all. And here West discusses the issue of black diaspora as it is explicated before, which is done on the black intellectualization. Therefore, for me, the core point is to justify the rise of blacks, and for this reason, West, in his intellectual conceptualization, points out the fact that there are some cultural attitudes of blacks to erase negative representation of the past, which causes the conflict between whites and black, so it becomes the concern of multiculturalism. On the other hand, it is obvious that there are political reasons to hold this idea, through which West intentionally makes use them all by depending upon this argumentation. In my opinion, it is highly probable that this situation has been discussed for the predefined multicultural concepts for black intellectuals, whose features are politically oriented and whose outcomes are being dependent upon black literature purposefully. I think these arguments, which were asserted, are somehow seen as an inevitable cause of Eurocentric power, which can be observed as multiculturalism in nationalism, and at least the common intention is regulated from from this perspective. However, I do not agree with West's consistency to hold his multicultural idea in keeping it under black intellectuals, because no matter how we expect West to be fair and impartial during the evaluation, the things that he uttered for the intellectual black generation about the survival of black race and the steps of black intellectuals, it can't be done properly because of the fact that he belongs to the same race and he has the same skin color and he has the same kinship, which were all hindered, degraded, and made inferior by Eurocentric scope. Lastly, as far as I'm concerned, West is not presenting racist way of justifying his argument in his new cultural politics of difference, although there are racist examples quoted from the target novels through the exemplification of the main concept. So what he wants to do is to show that there will be a multicultural atmosphere through which every nation, every race, every gender is welcome under each and proper discipline, whose criteria have to be defined according to multiculturalism. Thus, rather than having racist attribution, he prefers politically oriented multicultural understanding of national concepts, whose regulations are made under black feminist diaspora. Thank you so much. So, firstly, just before your questions, I just want to ask myself a question. Professor, there are two novels that I read. One is House on Mango Street, and the other one is Jean Rice's White Sargasso Sea. We are able to observe multicultural elements in itself, through national identities and ethnicities and everything. But I think, in my mind, it seems like both have some post-colonial identities as well. Because one is, as you remember, because you said that it is the first one is Chicana, and the other one is Caribbean American. What kind of difference is that? So that they are just illuminating the thoughts of multiculturality, but at the same time, I think there are many effects of post-colonial issues.
What are the differences between Caribbean and Chicano?
Yeah.
The experience of in the case of Jean Louis, I believe it's I haven't read White Sargasso Sea, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's also there's the experience of diaspora and exile in her work, whereas in regards to the Mexican American experience in Santa Cisneros, right? It's migration rather than exile or diaspora, right? So there's a clear difference.
Okay.
And I think also being shaped by geography, right? The Caribbean versus an urban space like Chicago with ties to Mexico.
But if you consider that Caribbean islands just colonized by French power, so that French influence and post-colonial effects of France, I think, are able to be observed during the novel.
And I agree with you, but I think that you can definitely look at the Caribbean as a post-colonial space, right? Not just you can see the case of Haiti, the case of the Dominican Republic, but in some ways too, the Mexican American experience has a kind of a post-colonial. There is a bit of a post-colonial experience there, but it's shaped in a very different way than say the Caribbean.
All right, thank you so much. Now for the questions, please. Yes, please.
I have a question. It's actually just more of a clarification. I was wondering if you could clarify for me your argument between the relationship between Dr. West's political ideology as explicated in that great book, and so how you see that related to black feminism, which I believe you're articulating here through a politically oppositional reading of these great black African American female writers, right? So can you just explain for me again the connection between Dr. West and black feminism?
Yes, of course, doctor. So first of all, while reading his essay, he just focuses upon one thing. So he's just trying to explicate black diaspora issue, and he gives many black writers, especially black intellectuals like Morrison, and then Octavia Butler, and then the others, and like Alice Walker. And he says that black intellectuals, all right, are able to have their chance to explicate the issues of black race that realize many years ago. But here, he says that, by the way, he's my Facebook friend. So we've been corresponding with him. He's a very good man.
Oh, yeah, he's
Oh,
a great
right.
guy. He's very cool.
And then he says that, I think, rather than explication of whites for the problems of blacks, he prefers blacks to explain their own problems. So that I think he criticizes black writers because not having consistent enough to hold their kinship issue. So that he says that rather than trying to explicate these issues on the white supremacist thoughts, try to do it by yourself. So, and then he explains black diaspora and black feminism. That's why I just try to make a kind of a correspondence between black diaspora issue, black feminism, and overall multicultural issue.
Okay, great. Yeah,
Thank you so much, Dr. Hope you enjoy it. Yes, please.
Yes, my name is Tarık Gülcü.
Nice to meet you.
Here you focus on you black, you woman.
Yay.
There is a quotation. This reminded me of Okul Pepitek's work, Song of Okul and Song of Labino. Okul is depicted as the husband and he is also black.
Wow.
And his wife, Labino, is also a black woman. And he also says the same word.
So derogatory slurs, huh?
To his wife, and so that this in fact reflects his identity, his mimicry, because he despises his ethnic identity and culture in terms of his skin color.
Absolutely.
And tries to glorify the Western ideals in terms of the white people.
Yes, you're
So
right.
This brings us, I think, to Franz Fanon's theory about rather psychoanalytic approach to the approach to the black people's psychological situation when they encounter the white people. In the Mexican and White Masks, in his work, Mexican and White Masks, he argues that when the black people meet a white person, they encounter or rather experience a shock, a cultural shock, because they feel themselves humiliated. This is rather Franz Fanon's argument.
All right, all right.
But still, and the novel you analyzed, Thomas Morrison's novel,
Yeah.
also reflects this issue. So multiculturalism, in conclusion, is rather a multifaceted issue.
Absolutely.
And rather, in terms of the transnationalism, is also an umbrella term for this matter.
Okay, in what way? Sorry, I couldn't understand the last one.
Transnationalism.
Transnationalism. Oh, sorry. All right.
Yes.
All right.
Because multiculturalism, when we say it, we don't only reflect the white or the European or English and American versus the Indian or etc. No. And this is also one of the aspects, but in terms of the gender issue, and especially you said the black women,
Yeah.
women get exposed to segregation in two times. Why? Because of their situation in the patriarchal society, and also their skin color.
Absolutely.
So
This is
I
summarization.
think we need to just wrap up the question really quick so that we have time for our coffee break.
Okay.
So,
Thank you so much. Any questions?
I think we have to stop with the question so that we have time for a little break.
All right, Doctor.
For the next panel session.
So, thank you.